All right, folks, here we are, 8 Ways to another episode. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm always looking forward to the conversations. I'm particularly excited about this conversation. Uh, this is going to be 8 ways to rescue your underperforming teammates, your underperforming employees. And this is particularly important to me now. Some of you may have seen a recent LinkedIn post in which I shared about a friend of mine who is an adjunct professor at a couple of different colleges, and she walked in one day to learn about what was her schedule going to be like next semester. And instead of sharing with her what her schedule was going to be like, they said, "We're not going to renew your contract. We're not going to work with you any longer." And she had never heard a peep about anyone's dissatisfaction with her performance, though it was dissatisfaction with her performance that led to the decision to not include her in the future. This is immoral and cruel and horrible, and it's a dereliction of duty of a leader. And so this is one of the reasons I'm so excited to be talking about this topic today, and I'm so excited to have my friend Joshua Herzog Marks with us. Josh and I have been friends for 29 years. Last month, I think we probably met in June
That's right. Last
95.
month.
And
Yeah,
so
who's keeping track?
this is our 29-year anniversary party. uh, Josh is an incredible leader in his own right and has had a successful exit. Was it Google who bought your company?
It was Google that bought my company.
What a triumph! And now a founder and startup coach. Josh, introduce yourself a little bit further.
Sure. I am super excited to be here. I feel like sorry. I also have COVID today, so bear with me. I'm super excited to be here. I've been watching your live streams for, I don't know, a couple of years now, it feels like, and I'm happy to be here. Um, I retired from salary work about 2 years ago and did that so I could take over the primary parenting. So in between school drop off and school pickup, when I'm not doing the shopping and the laundry and cleaning the house and cooking dinner and nagging kids to do their homework and all of those things, I have a small niche coaching, mentorship, and advisory practice for founders, solo product managers, and first time heads of product at very, very early stage tech companies. And not a big surprise, but a lot of the conversations I have with my clients have to do with how do you deal with underperformers. So I'm hoping to share some stuff. I'm hoping to learn a lot of stuff too.
Those are a lot of the conversations I have with leaders as well. Those how do I deal with underperformers?
Yeah.
And one of the things that people I'm hearing complain about, leaders are complaining about, this should be obvious. Why don't they know this? Why don't they understand this? Why don't they do this? And they think that people's ignorance. I find often that leaders conflate ignorance, which I say without any stank on it, right? It's just a fact
Uh-huh.
of not knowing. They conflate ignorance with the word I'm looking for is these kids today. They are so entitled, so they
Yeah.
conflate ignorance with entitlement. Um, Thrilled to get going on the what to do about it. Josh, tell us your first suggestion about how to deal with underperformers.
Sure. So I had to come up with four, and for each one of these, I think there are strengths and weaknesses of
Mm,
them. And I'm
mm,
going to start with the classic approach. This is the one that uh, most of the feedback I've gotten when I've been an underperformer, and we've all been underperformers, it's what I watched my boss do, my boss's bosses do, my boss's bosses bosses do. It's the one that most of us will default to, and I think it's worth talking about first. Um, I call this one the classic approach. And this is the one where you, as the manager, take on a lot of responsibility. You watch your underperformer carefully. You talk with them and listen carefully during the one on ones. You try to diagnose what's blocking them and what's keeping them from better performance. You put together, maybe in your head, maybe written down, a plan to help them move on from this underperformance. And then you sit down, you work with them to implement this plan. Like I said, it's the most common. And that's really its strength. It's the one that most of us think we know how to do. And it's the one that most of us are most likely to have the most experience with. So we're most comfortable with going through it. The downside is I think it strips your report from their agency. and it's
Mhm.
putting all the responsibility for their success or failure onto you as the manager. Um, I'll pause there. What do you think?
I love everything that you said, and my favorite part of this approach is the diagnose part. Right?
Hmm.
It's easy to say your results are inadequate. Your results are not what we need. Your results aren't sufficient. The hard part is to figure out why. And I think that a lot of leaders skip skip that part because it's one of the hard parts. So, and I
Yeah.
think that also your analysis of its weakness is right on the money.
Yeah, well, if you liked that, then I can't wait to get some of the later ones. I do agree. The diagnosis is the hardest part, and I'm not even sure if it's always even possible. I'm the child of a
Mm.
psychotherapist. I'm the
Yeah.
spouse of a psychotherapist. These are now psychotherapy is not the same as management, but these are folks who go to school
Mm.
and receive tons of training in very carefully trying to figure out what's going on. And as somebody who themselves has been to psychotherapy, it's really, really hard and probably isn't going to work for a long time, if ever.
Yeah.
Um,
I think about
and
actually
yeah,
some of my own growth in my ability to perform, right? And I look back, say 20 years at the things that I was ineffective at that I'm now effective with. And I don't necessarily know what I was doing wrong.
mm,
Even me, right? Even if I look at my I'm much more effective at that now. What am I doing differently? And not I don't know in every case.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think it's so valuable what you're saying about taking away the other person's agency and the other person's agency and the other person's responsibility to be solving the problem. When we feed somebody a solution, they don't it doesn't lay the mental track that creates the wisdom and the insight that allowed us to come up with that solution.
that's right. That's right. They're not getting the sets and reps in
Yeah,
because a lot of times work is complicated. Work
yeah.
is in some way unknowable, and that's what experience is for. And I think we'll come. I suspect we're going to come back to talking about the value of experience in the person who's underperforming
Mhm.
and what their experience has to bring as we get further into this.
So much yes. The last thing that I'll say about this is that very often when a leader is talking to me and saying, "I don't know why my people don't have good judgment," right? They lack judgment. He's been here for 5 years and he still doesn't have the judgment. And I know the answer to the question that I ask next, which is when he comes to you with the question or with the problem, what do you do? And the answer is, well,
Hmm.
I solve it. Well, that's why he
Mm,
doesn't have the judgment.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Time then for my first suggestion for the folks. And my first suggestion for you all is let the person know for crying out loud. Right. And so I'm sure you're not surprised by this suggestion because I railed against the practice of withholding the information that people are struggling from them. And the one time in my employment history that I can think of where I was fired, it went, "You're doing great, you're doing great, you're doing great, you're fired for this reason." It's like, I've been doing that all along, and I've been
Hmm.
doing that thing that you asked me not to do with the best intent in the world, right? And I
Hmm.
can see now with my with my, what is it? Probably, um, 25 years later, I can see that they were right to
Hmm.
not want that behavior in their organization. They were not right not to ask me to let the behavior go before they decided to let me go.
Um, so I have a question for you about that.
Yeah.
How well do you think they would have been able to articulate what was wrong?
Um,
Because that's hard too, isn't it?
yeah, it is hard. And so, I mean, one of my thoughts for you in response to
Uh-huh.
this, and I know from our past conversations that I believe that you will agree. Your job as a leader is your job as a leader, and that's part of it. It's
Yep.
hard. If you can't articulate it, then go talk to your spouse, talk to other
Hmm.
folks in your organization, talk to other leaders outside your organization, figure out how to articulate it. Get with a leadership coach, get with
Yep.
Josh. Josh will help you articulate it. I work with leaders to to
Yep.
to say, "Well, what is it that they did? What if they had done this? Would that have been okay? Why or why not?" So that there are people who can help you figure
Yep.
out how to articulate this, and it is your job to articulate it. Just like
Yep.
it's your salespeople's job to get the prospects and get the contracts, it is your job to articulate what you want people to do differently. And what is the reason that what they're doing now is insufficient. So it's your job to
Yep.
articulate it. That's number 1. Number 2, they had absolutely no problem articulating it when I said, Why?" They came right out with it and said what they knew had been a problem all along.
Yeah. If I could yes and you, I
Please.
think sometimes people wait, right? They wait until they can articulate
Mm,
it. And oftentimes it's too late at that point. So the moment you get that little tickle, it doesn't feel right. That's when you go engage your peers, your colleagues, your boss, if you're lucky enough to have one,
mm.
your coach, whatever your support crew is, your partner, your spouse, your significant other, right? Your kids, I don't know who, read a book about it. But the moment you get that tickle is the moment you need as the manager, as the boss, as the leader to start doing that work and figuring out what's really going on. Because, yeah, thumbs
100%.
up.
Eh, and I won't go through this, like, this next kind of suggestion inside this conversation is worthy perhaps of a whole live stream all to itself. If you have been tolerating a behavior for any more than, like, 2 weeks, then when you come to say, "I need a different behavior from you, this behavior is unacceptable," you've gotta make a change. The first thing that comes out of your mouth in that conversation is an apology for having let it stand, because what you let stand is the standard. So you're
Yep.
now telling them, "I have miscommunicated the standard to you. I'm so sorry."
Yep. Worse
Move
than
number
that
1.
is you're always practicing something. So not only did you miscommunicate the standard, but you had them practicing to get better and better at that thing you don't want them to do.
I knew I was gonna love this conversation with you, Josh. All right. Very, very, very good. Brilliant insight. Very, very important insight for you to carry, right? Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent.
Ooh, I like that.
I wish I
Gotta
could
write
take
that
credit
down.
for it, but, I don't, and I don't remember where I've heard it, but, there you have it. Practice makes
Okay.
permanent. All right,
Practice
Josh,
makes
what
permanent.
is your number 2, suggestion
Okay.
for the people at home?
I feel like I need to say this one out loud. But sometimes the right thing to do with an underperformer is to let them go.
Mhm.
Um, and this feels like it should be the easiest one because all you need to do is fire somebody, which is an unpleasant job, but one that probably many of us. Oh, it's not bad news bears. That's okay. Just let them go. Yeah,
Mm.
there you go. Fire them. That's the thing to do. If you're a good manager, if you aspire to be a good manager and a good leader, this one's actually kind of complicated. Um,
Mhm.
it's kind of complicated because you need to look at yourself as much as you need to look at the other person to figure out why they're not succeeding. But the truth of the matter is, and again, most of my experience is at very early stage tech companies. These are startups. Um, not every great person is going to be a great employee at every great company.
Mm.
You have to think about the context of the job, the support and resources available. And you are sometimes going to have people working for you. You are sometimes going to hire people who are professionally fantastic. They have a history of good performance. They understand your business. They understand the market. They know what they're supposed to be doing. On paper, they looked great. In the interviews, they looked great. But you get them to the company and something isn't a good fit. And sometimes you can fix it and sometimes you can't. And keeping somebody in a job at which they are failing and possibly even being uh, unhappy about that, right? Suffering because of that isn't doing anybody any favors. It's not doing your other reports, your other employees, your colleagues any favors because here's this person failing inside the company. It's not doing you any favors because you aren't getting the thing that you need. And it's not doing them any favors because if you actually lack the capacity to support them in improvement, and if this is a context where they are unlikely to be successful, the kindest thing you can do is thoughtfully, professionally, kindly to let them go.
100% agree. And it is, once again, your job as a leader is not easy. It is what it is. Your job as a
Yeah.
leader is what it is. Firing people is no fun. And I've done it, and it doesn't get easier and it doesn't get more fun. As well, it should not. As well, it should not, I think. Um, if you are curious at home, by the way, about how to do this with kindness and grace, we have
Hmm.
a blog article and a video called, I think it's something like the 7 keys to the least worst way to fire someone. If you don't easily find that on our website, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send you a link to the 7 keys to the least worst way to fire somebody.
Oh, I like that. My like heuristic for is letting somebody go going well. My
Mm,
heuristic is um, would you or they still reach out if they needed some support, a networking or an introduction,
yeah,
and would they still recommend their friends and colleagues for an open position at your company? And if
that's
the answer
awesome.
is no, I mean, there's lots of reasons to fire somebody. Sometimes it's for cause, sometimes it's for gross negligence. There's a lot of bad reasons. But if it's not a great fit and you can't say yes to those, then
Mhm.
what a great time to work with a coach,
Yeah,
work with a colleague, work with a
yeah.
mentor, work with somebody who can help you do a better job of this.
To illustrate how well this can go, the last time I fired someone, he said, "Thank." First of all, he knew it was coming. There was no
Yeah.
surprise. Secondly, after a moment's kind of deep breathing, he said, "Thank you so much for
Mhm.
everything. I consider you my business dad." Right? That's how that employment relationship ended, and the relationship to some degree continues.
Yeah.
Um,
Huh. I feel like we can unpack business dad in a whole separate episode as well.
very, very possibly. One piece I want to put on onto this, a little flavor onto this, is that
Uh-huh.
very often when you let somebody go, it is a relief for them.
Yes.
In addition to being frightening, it is also a relief.
Yes.
And and though it may cause somebody profound challenge in the short run, it can be a tremendous benefit to their career, because the
Yes.
longer we spend in a job struggling and or especially failing, the more damaging that is to our long-term prospects.
Yeah. And could we say a thing for a minute about the other people on your team, your other reports?
Oh,
Right?
yes,
If the
please.
person, right? I just want to say this out loud. If the person is truly struggling, and they aren't always, sometimes it's just a bad fit, but if they're truly struggling and truly underperforming, and there isn't a change happening, it's not just impacting you as the manager, not just impacting the company as bottom line, but there's a whole other team of people who are experiencing things like extra work because they're covering for somebody, extra work because they aren't, pulling their weight. Um, they're getting this signal, right? Because chances are people are being supported or disciplined or whatever in private, which is very professional, right? Which means they are seeing this underperformer still sticking around and they're wondering what kind of company they're at and what's the behavior that is rewarded. So when we say that like you're always practicing something, right? What you practice makes permanent. These aren't just for individual skills, these are for organizational skills.
I love
And
that.
keeping people around that are making the company worse for everybody else, making the work experience worse for everybody else, is you are practicing that behavior and you are turning that into your company culture. You are making it permanent.
So
That's bad.
people, yeah, the listener may be saying, "You said this was gonna be 8 ways to rescue your underperformers." So
Yeah.
I refer you back to my suggestion that this
Yep.
is good for them. It may be a relief, and it's better for their long-term prospects. The facts are also that they are not gonna be your only underperformer. So it may
Hmm.
be that you're rescuing other underperformers from the influences that Josh was just talking about by removing this one person who is underperforming and not improving, and especially if they're not committed to improving. I forget what the statistics are, but sitting next to a high performer drags up the performance of the person sitting next to them, and sitting next to
Yeah.
an underperformer drags down the performance. And this is true not just in an office setting, it's true also in a virtual setting. So true and so valuable. All right.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have?
There's so much more inside this that it's hard for me to move on. And yet, we do want to let the people go and also give them all 8 of our suggestions. So, my
I'm
suggestion.
disappointed we can't compress a lifetime of management experience into a what 45, 35 minute live stream
Yeah,
episode.
we'll
What a shame.
we'll confer later, right? Maybe
Yeah.
round 2, we'll figure out how to coalesce all these many decades of experience into one 35 or 45-minute episode. For now, my second suggestion is measure frequently, feedback frequently. So there's a lot inside here. If you're going to measure their behaviors, measure their performance, then you have to be specific about what is the metrics. What are the metrics that you are measuring? And I'm laughing because this is also sometimes hard. It's
Hmm.
it's easier in a sales environment. That's a pretty digital environment. It's harder in something like customer service. What are we
Yeah.
measuring? Well, you've got to figure out what you're measuring, and it can't just be results. It's also got to be behaviors, and give people feedback frequently. So
Yeah.
the analogy here is, in some ways, you are the eyes for this person who is perhaps less experienced than you, perhaps has less insight and judgment, and we all have blind spots about our own selves. So even if they have more experience and better judgment than you, you still can't read the label from inside the jar. So we all
Yeah.
need feedback. So
Yep.
the metaphor that I often use is, imagine driving down even a straight freeway with your eyes closed. How long are you willing to have your eyes closed before you open them? I imagine it's probably not a whole lot more than a second or two. And if you're not giving frequent feedback as a result of having measured frequently, then they are driving down the freeway in some sense with their eyes closed.
Yeah. You're you're touching on one of my, I don't know, favorite pet peeves. I have a lot of pet peeves. One of my favorite ones in the tech industry is there's a big push towards outcomes over outputs,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Outcomes is like, the business reality that you create, sell more widgets, get more users, whatever that thing happens to be, right?
Yeah.
Outputs are the feature you released, the conversation you had with a client, whatever those,
Sales calls,
what,
outgoing sales calls you make.
yeah, outgoing sales calls you make. And sure, of course, everybody should be thinking about business outcomes. Like that's how you get a company aligned, but you
Right.
can't really coach on outcomes. And for a lot of people at a lot of companies and a lot of different kinds of roles, the outcomes are kind of preordained. You know,
Mm.
if you're a sales rep and the product is crappy, if the leadership is focusing on the wrong market, there's only so much you're going to be able to do. But
Yep.
a great coach is going to, make sure you are hitting your numbers for outbound calls and make sure those outbound calls are going to your, idealized, customer profile. And they're going to listen to the call recordings and make sure that you're hitting on the points and coach you how to do a better job with the demos and whatever the different steps are going to be, right? That
Right.
output based coaching is really, really critical. And I think in this world of outcomes over outputs, we forget about the importance of coaching on outputs.
Another, if you're having trouble making this distinction, another way of thinking about outputs is behaviors, right? Did you
Yeah.
make 30 calls
Mhm.
today? Yes or
Yeah.
no? Did you use an encouraging tone of voice? Did you leave silence after your questions for the prospect to answer your question? Um, these are behaviors that you can observe. I can't make you buy. I can do the behaviors that are going to maximize the likelihood that if this is the right product for you, that you are
Hmm.
going to see that and want it and ask
Yeah.
for it. Gail
Can I share like
Goldberg,
the one weird trick for like taking
please.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
here's a one weird trick for reducing your likelihood of hiring people who are underperforming
Mm,
using what you just said, which was if you can identify the behaviors that you care about in this job, that's what you want to be interviewing for, right? Too often we interview for the outcomes too. Oh, did you hit your number, right? Did
right.
you have, happy customers? Whatever those things are great, right? But the real question is, what were the behaviors that you can tie back to the actual requirements of the job? And if you can measure those with somebody who's sitting in that seat, you can ask about those when you are looking to hire them.
Right on.
That'd be my fifth one. My fifth one dealing with underperformers is try to avoid hiring them in the first place by understanding what the job really is. This thing of like,
I I love it. Yeah,
right,
the
of like
bonus
measuring
suggestion.
frequently, right? Like that's a really hard thing to do. Like, what do we actually like? Man, that's a tough thing, right? This is
Yeah.
your like second really hard thing you're asking managers to do. This is a tough job.
Everything we're talking about probably is going to be hard, right? Gail Goldberg, speaking of which, right, says,
Uh
"What
huh.
about encouragement during the feedback and acknowledgement of going well?" Absolutely. So
Yeah.
the research they say that it takes 7 attaboys in some way, right? 7 thank you. This is going well to every one criticism in
Hmm.
order to keep the relationship building and going well. Uh, if you fall below that ratio, then you start to undermine the sense of trust and well-being in the relationship. So, when I'm driving, for example, when I'm driving down the freeway, most of the time I'm going, "Yep, I'm between the lines. I'm between the lines. Nice job. Well done. I'm between the lines. Oh, getting a little too close to the right." And then I get feedback potentially from the rumble strip. That's a
Uh huh.
louder feedback, right? But
Yeah.
most of the time, it's straight on, well done, right on, and even your worst performers are doing much more of the behavior that you want than they are the behavior that you don't want, just in terms of the frequency, the ratios. So
Yep.
there's lots of
So,
opportunity to say, "Thank you for this, keep this up."
though a word of warning, um, my kids who are teens now, for years have been saying to me, "Dad, are you giving me a shit sandwich right now when I say something
Ooh,
nice?"
yeah.
And
You
then they're like, "Wait a minute, you just said something nice to me. Are you about to say the negative thing and then say the nice thing after that as well?" It's like, you know, I would just say that means to me that means your employees are listening carefully for the feedback as well, right?
Yeah.
The fact that my kids are noticing this and your employees are noticing it as well, if you're doing it, not thoughtfully, if you're doing kind of, on rote, on automatic, right? Positive, negative, positive, whatever that thing is. That is just a reminder to you as their manager that they really crave this feedback. And
Mm.
your best employees are going to especially crave constructive feedback.
The shit sandwich that Josh is referring to, in case you're not familiar with this, is the terrible advice that we're given. Give them a compliment, then the
Mhm.
criticism, then another compliment to make it to kind of sandwich the hard part. Terrible, terrible guidance.
Right. The
Um,
good guidance is first give them 3 pieces of positive feedback, then the negative feedback, then the 4 pieces of positive feedback after that.
oh
That's
my
that's that's
goodness,
the
so
lesson I
much
took away
bread.
from Gail.
So
Yes.
much bread. When I'm talking about this ratio, it's not right now in this moment. It's over the course of this week, over the course of this
Yeah.
month, right? So right now, Josh, what I have to tell you is this needs to change because of for this reason. But an hour from now, I might say, "Oh, Josh, the way you did
Mhm.
this had this effect. Thank you so much." I won't get into what the correct model looks like right now, although feel free to reach out if you want guidance on the model. The shit sandwich doesn't work, and the ratio is over time, not
Yeah.
in this moment.
Yeah.
All
My
right, Josh.
takeaway is that giving negative feedback is in the context of your relationship with people. And if you got a crappy relationship, your feedback's not going to go over very well and you're not going to be very effective at changing behavior. If you got a
Yep.
strong relationship, you can screw up almost everything else.
Yes. 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 Mm.
Okay.
So much. So much. Yes. All
Yeah.
right, Josh. What is your third suggestion for the good folks?
Okay. I think you'll like this one. This is Bad News Bears. Um, You are, Aaron, you're also old, like I am. You might remember the 1976 film of the same name. Walter Matthau plays
I
a
do
washed
remember.
up alcoholic, former minor league baseball player, and a bunch of like down on their luck kids persuade him to coach their little league team, right? A bunch of misfits. And in Bad News Bears, right, the lesson of it is as long as you have one kid who can pitch, one kid who can catch, one kid who can field, one kid who can bat, one kid who can run, right? If you put everybody in just the right place,
Mm.
you can win the league championship.
Mm.
So the bad news bear strategy is a pretty common one when you have someone who is underperforming, but for whatever reason, you don't feel like you can get rid of them, right? Maybe they have substantial social capital of the company. They've been there a long time. Maybe, let's see, we're watching Hacks right now at my house, right? So this is like maybe you have an admin who is the owner's kid, right? And you can't get rid of them because of that. Maybe they have a lot of tribal knowledge. They know where the bodies are buried. They know where the forms are kept. They know how this like one thing is done every year. Maybe they have a reputation for being nice, right? Maybe other employees like them, and it would feel really bad if they were let go. So sometimes you'll ask yourself questions like, um, why do we need the employee to step up in this way, right? Why can't we just keep them at their current level, right? If you're a company where people tend to get promoted and there's this one person who like isn't making promotion and you're wondering like, is that okay? That might suggest that, you know, this is the bad news bears model works. And the idea is similar to the classic model. You carefully watch them, you try to identify their strengths, and you find the specific role for them within the organization where they can be successful. So
Mm.
slot them in just right. Um, there are advantages to this, right? You get to keep a person who might be valuable for some very specific, right? Possibly very narrow reason. You don't have to fire somebody, which makes you feel like you're a nicer person, which we talked about already. The disadvantage, though, is that once again, the responsibility is all being put onto you as the manager. And once again, you are stripping your employee of um, of their ability to improve and affect their own career. So if it fails, once again, it is not their failure; it is your failure as the
Mm.
manager.
And so what do you think then, Josh, about things like job crafting, where if you are my supervisor, I come to you and I say, I recognize I have these strengths, they're not being used to the greatest advantage. I have these weaknesses and they're really holding me back. I'd like to shift things in this way. What do you think about that as a bad news bears approach?
I think sometimes it can work. Um, I think the thing that makes it different, what you just said. So, what do I think of that? I'm a little bit skeptical of anything that makes your org structure look weird.
Mm.
And in general, I think companies that do things in boring ways tend to be more successful because your reason for being is the widget or the product or the service or whatever it is. It's not like the very particular organizational structure that you follow. But what I liked about the story that you told about job crafting is there's two people in the story with agency and they're working together to solve a problem. And we'll talk about that when I get to my
Mm.
fourth one. But that's really, really different than me as the manager trying to figure where to slot somebody in.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really important stuff, right? And this is related in some ways to Moneyball, right? The way that the A's created a team that could challenge the Yankees with a
Yep.
much smaller budget is we're going to
Yep.
figure out what are the skills that we need to
Yep.
fill in our gaps rather than hiring all-star after all-star after all-star. I'm gonna move back in time for a moment because
Sure.
Gail Goldberg has said something I have got to push back on. She says the shit sandwich allows for the person to relax with your reminder of what you value. Relaxed state allows for cognitive processing rather than fight or flight. So more ready to use feedback. So let me pick this apart and agree with some of it and
Yeah.
disagree with some of it. Right? Relaxed state allows for cognitive processing rather than fight or flight. Yes, absolutely 100%. So there I refer back to what Josh was saying about inside a strong relationship, it's much
Mhm.
easier to take critical input. You can also contextualize your what they call negative feedback, your critical feedback. You can say,
Hmm.
I don't want you to hear this as you're in trouble. I'm thrilled with your performance in so many ways. I don't want you to hear this as your job is on the line. So, uh, that said, everything about this presentation that you gave was terrific, except that your voice, the level of your voice, your volume, and your
Hmm.
articulation of your words was insufficient. So you can contextualize the feedback, the criticism, in order to help people relax. There is a good deal of professional setting research that shows that
Yep.
the shit sandwich actually backfires for a couple of reasons. One is people leave the conversation going, "Hey, 2 to 1," or in Josh's case, right, like
Yeah.
7 to 1. You did these 3 things great, these 4 things great, with that one problem in the middle. The ratio is great. I'm doing fine. I don't actually need to change. And then there's also the primacy recency bias, which says
Yep.
that people remember the first thing that they heard and they remember the last thing that they heard and they forget all the stuff in between. So
Yeah.
those are a couple of reasons why the shit sandwich backfires. And the third and most important reason that the shit sandwich backfires is that people know that the shit sandwich exists to as a, I
Hmm.
think, foolhardy attempt to do this
Yeah.
relaxing, and they, whether you intend it this way or not, believe that you are manipulating them.
Hmm.
they
Because
they
you are.
because you
Maybe for the
are
best reasons, but
right.
you are literally manipulating them.
So by
The example you
delivering the
gave,
shit sandwich, you undermine
yeah,
trust.
the example you gave about, delivering a presentation. I mean, this is the example that Kim Scott uses in her book Radical Candor, which everybody who's a manager should
Mm,
read.
agreed.
Um, and the feedback that right, she's a highly successful executive, and the book is fantastic, and the next book is fantastic too. Um, And in the example she uses, the person didn't say, your presentation was fantastic. There's just one small thing, right? What the person actually said was, it doesn't matter that your presentation was fantastic. You have this thing you're doing and it is undermining your success. And if you don't fix it, you are not going to be successful.
And
And
she uses that as an example of somebody to whom she has been grateful for her entire career.
yes, and I think it's actually really important. Not to, so I'm going to maybe disagree with you, and you might not have meant exactly what it was you said, but maybe disagree with you in that if the person is actually failing in a way that is impacting their future in your organization, their ability to be successful at all, you owe it to them to say that. I think the
Agreed.
way you make it less threatening is by saying it easy. My friend Roy Rappaport talks about this like a car driving towards a cliff, accelerating towards a cliff, and that ideally you want to have the conversation when the car is going like 1 or 2 miles an hour and it just started the path and you have like a whole mile to go,
Yes.
right? Those are the easy conversations to have,
There is a
right?
cliff ahead. If you
Right.
do not
Right.
change your
There's a cliff ahead
trajectory,
and you're heading in the
you
wrong
are
direction
gonna
towards
go
it, but
over.
don't worry, we got a mile and you're not going that fast, right?
Right.
So let's just hit the brakes and steer the car.
And
But
so if
because you're being honest with them about that cliff, that's when you're developing that trusted relationship, right?
yes. So if you've
Most of the time
got a
what
friend
happens
who's
is, yeah,
sorry,
it's when you're
go ahead.
like right at the edge and you're going 50 miles an hour and you got to do one of those like Hollywood skid to the edges where one like, wheel is hanging off. Like that's the
Bail
moment,
out of the car.
right? When people are like, why are you trying to shit sandwich this thing for me, right? You think you're trying to soothe my anxiety. Really, you're trying to soothe your own anxiety because you're worried I'm gonna be mad at you. I'm not mad at you because of the feedback. I'm mad
Yay.
at you because I've been heading towards this cliff for the past, 3 months, 4 months, and nobody said a damn thing,
And so
which was your experience.
if you've got to think of this in terms of a sandwich, think of it instead of compliment,
Hmm.
criticism in the middle sandwich. Think of it as context, criticism in the middle. I am
Yeah.
here to support you. And I want and believe you can succeed. That can be the bottom piece of bread. Then
Right.
tell them what they need to know, and then follow that up with, how can I help you? I'm here. I'm here, and I stand for your success. I am gonna be alongside you in whatever way that I can. That kind of context, that kind of sandwiching can be very constructive.
Yes. But that's not like a sandwich. That's not even a meal. That's like your entire diet, right?
There you
It doesn't matter if you have that shit sandwich, right? If your entire diet is crap.
Yeah. And then be keenly alert for them making the changes that you need. And even tiny little micro changes in the direction that you're looking for, celebrate them, celebrate them, celebrate them. Okay, we moved back in time. I think I think we've heard your third suggestion. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's
So
time for
then
your third.
time for my third. And it flows very well from what we were just talking about. Help them troubleshoot, which is different from what Josh was saying. Watch out for, right? Watch out for taking away their agency, where you hand them the solution, but instead you ask them questions that will help them think through, help them have the insights that you have had, help you and them figure out what is it in their actions, the things that they're doing and the ways that they are doing them that is leading to
Mhm.
the failure to perform in whatever way,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah,
can you can be alongside them like my dad running next to me, as I wobbled my way with my bicycle. You can be alongside them giving them guidance. Like when I
yeah.
was running alongside my daughter recently and she's looking at the ground right in front of her tire. And I say, look out ahead, right? So she's getting the reps of doing this rather than I'm holding on to the bike.
I like that. That's awfully similar to my fourth one.
All right. Well, we're about to get
Yeah,
to your fourth one.
I can't disagree with any of that. Um, can I tie it into my fourth?
By all
Because
means,
it's
and before we
okay.
get to your fourth,
Yeah.
Josh, tell the good folks at home how and why they might wanna get a hold of you.
Yeah. So if you are a founder at a startup, if you are a product manager at a startup who is reporting into a founder, if you are a product leader at a startup in your first leadership role, your first time being a head of product, or if you are a founder with somebody in one of those roles, it can be really lonely. Any of those roles are extremely lonely, and people benefit from support. I've been in that position myself 5 times across my 20-year career in tech, and 15 of those in those kinds of leadership roles. um, and I'd love to chat. I'm easy to find. I was blessed by my parents with incredible SEO, so you type Josh Herzig Marks or some combination of that into Google and you'll find me on LinkedIn, you'll find my website. I have like links to book time with me every place you might look. I have an
We
open
do
calendar
have
for a
that
reason.
that SEO
You
in
should
common, right?
Yes,
Josh Herzig
yes.
Marks and Aaron Schmuckler, we're the only ones.
And incredibly, with your name, Google will find you no matter what spelling you use. Impressively. Yeah.
Yeah. If you spell it wrong, you may find a doctor in Maryland, I think, but,
Huh.
that's relatively new. I don't know where
Huh.
this guy came from.
Good for him for graduating from medical school. That's great.
Right.
Congratulations.
Well done.
I'd love to chat. And, whether I'm the right person to help you out or somebody within my network, I love to make referrals out. You should just go grab time with me. I'm looking forward to meeting you.
All right, Josh, then, what is your fourth suggestion?
I think it's almost exactly the same as yours, but I have a cute name for it. It's called Don't Set Up to Fail.
Mm.
This one, yeah, Don't Set Up to Fail. This one I named after this French business school professor named Jean-Francois Manzoni. He wrote an article back in 1998 in HBR, Harvard Business Review, called the Set Up to Fail Syndrome. It turned it into a book, though honestly, the article is fantastic. You can get it for free. Just go ahead and Google that. Um, and this article makes the point that most of the time, when you're trying to help somebody, maybe with the classic model, maybe with the bad news bears model, right, you are removing agency, and you are doing two things wrong. One is you are removing their agency, and the second is you are overly focusing your attention on that underperforming person, and that over focus on the underperforming person makes their success unlikely,
Mm.
right? And does that because there are really four things which somebody needs in order to change and be successful, right? These four things are: number one, understands the expectations of the role; number two, understands how their behavior doesn't meet those expectations; Number three, decides they themselves want to meet those expectations, right?
Mhm.
And number four, realizes that they are the only ones who can change their behavior.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
If those four things aren't met, they are not going to be successful in change. So, how does this work? Number one, you as the manager need to clarify your expectations and the needs of the role and make sure that your report understands that is your responsibility, right? Your first responsibility is making sure they understand the needs of the role. And if they don't do that, do not pass go. Do not collect your $200. You are not meeting the minimum requirements of your job as a manager, right?
Yes.
Next, you can communicate to them that you will do everything reasonable in your power to help them be successful. Everything reasonable. And then this is the hardest part of all for most people. You have to step back and shut up. That is a moment where you have to stop talking and stop acting, right? Because you need to give them the space to decide what they want to do
Mm. Mm.
and figure out the help that they're going to ask for. If you do anything else, if you suggest a coach, hi, right? If you suggest a book, if you suggest a process, a template, whatever it is, all of a sudden it's not them being unsuccessful, it's your failure. And if they continue to underperform, it's because you told them the wrong thing.
Mm.
If they are responsible, they can ask for things like, you know what I could really use? I could use a more frequent check in. Could I ask you to review my work a little bit earlier, knowing that it's not a finished draft? There's this course that I found on LinkedIn Learning. Could I sign up for that? I could really use a coach who's done this before. Any of those things are great answers, but because they're the ones asking for it, right? And they're the ones, their acknowledgement that they are the ones who need to change and they are taking responsibility for their own behavior. And I fundamentally believe that 9 times out of 10, this is the only path. So, agreeing with you, that's going to lead to real, permanent,
Mm.
lasting, and meaningful change by the people who report to you.
There are a couple of places where, and I think this is
Huh?
very wise. I don't get absolute about this. Um, right? Is that with one particular underperformer, for example, you may sometimes come in and guide very directly about
Yeah.
a particular problem, and it's kind of like the feedback thing, like where right you want to
Yep.
on the whole be giving encouraging, or all feedback should be encouraging, but giving
Yep.
kudos and congratulations, um, and only sometimes giving corrective feedback. Similarly, here, I think you want to stack heavily on the you figure it out,
Yep.
and require, hey, I want you to come to me, give them time. I want you to come to me next
Yeah.
week with 3 suggestions about how you might
Yep.
address this, how you might
Yep.
learn to do this better. And sometimes it may make sense for you to step in, especially if they've put in some effort to come up with a good way and have come up short. You
Yep.
might step in at that point and say, "All right, this one's gonna be a gimme, and you're gonna have to keep coming up. Like you are responsible for your own self improvement, even though
Yeah.
I'm gonna come in sometimes." Right? I think about Gandalf, for example. Right? For the most part, those darn hobbits had to do it all themselves, and every
Hmm.
once in a while, "You shall not pass" was his
Yes.
response. But that only happened once in the whole in
It's
the whole series.
it is pretty rewarding when you as a manager and leader can do the whole like, Deus ex machina thing and just like solve a problem. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you can do that, absolutely celebrate. And you said something important, I don't know, half an hour ago about you said something important a half an hour ago about blind spots, right?
Mm.
Sometimes all the person needs is insight, particularly if you have figured out the behaviors, if you figure out the outputs really, really well. It's like, Aaron, you're making 10 calls a day, but there is a reason that we set 15 calls a day as a limit. You're not going to hit your goals because of that. You're like, oh, okay, great. I know what to do now, right? This extra piece of information, right? You haven't been a salesperson for very long. You just didn't know. You got the insight. Your behavior is going to change.
Yeah.
I love
So
those moments. And every time you can find one of those, you should absolutely do that.
So if I'm supposed to make 15 calls, Josh, and I say to
Yeah.
you, you say that to me, there's a reason the number is 15 and you're only making 10. What if I say, but John over here is our top sales guy and he's making 8? how might you respond to that underperformer?
Um, I don't particularly like these kinds of questions because the context is super interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. It's like answer
right.
this question in a vacuum now.
Yes. Answer question in a vacuum. So generically speaking, we can all imagine reasons why there might be a gap. But this might be a great opportunity for John to go mentor. I've already lost track of the names, right? Like, great. Why don't you go ask John,
Yeah.
right? Why don't you go find out, right? You're curious. I'm not going to give you the answer. Like, you go figure it out. And you discover that John has a different target customer, right? With much larger deals and much longer lead times. So he doesn't have enough time for 15 calls, right?
Right.
It's because John gets the better leads. It's because John does more research up front. It's because John's been doing it for long enough, right? He's got the sets and the reps in, right?
There you go.
It could be that maybe John has a problem, right? John is doing well right now this quarter, but his pipeline is crap. And next quarter and the quarter after and the quarter after that are going to be really, really tough for him because he didn't build up his pipeline. But I might start with interesting question. Why don't you go talk to John?
Yeah. Great. Right. And that the sets and the reps I think is really important. And I'm not a big sports fan. Right. Like
Nor I.
if you ask me what's going on in, I don't even know what season we're in. Like what sport is being played right now. I don't know. And I love sports
Badminton. This
metaphors.
is it's a badminton season.
Badminton season. Right. I
Badminton
love
season.
sports metaphors because I just find them so useful. Right. If John is getting on base,
Hmm.
taking, one swing, and he waits for just the right pitch, and he's got the reps to have the intuition to know exactly what pitch to swing at, and he watches a lot of pitches go by. If
Yeah.
you are striking out watching, right, which is you don't swing, it's a called strike. The umpire says that was a perfect pitch. Sorry, you didn't swing, it's still a strike. If you're striking
Yep.
out watching, your
Yep.
first your first move on the path to being like John is to swing more. I would rather
Yeah.
you strike out swinging than strike out watching because you're going to learn by striking out
Hmm.
swinging.
That's how you get the touchdowns.
Yes,
I have no idea what I'm talking about. Sports
that is how you
ball.
get the touchdowns. Sports ball, yeah. So I love it, I'm reminded of a company that we worked with at one point where the best driver in this company.
Hmm.
They're the best driver. Great safety record. The
Hmm.
clients love him. Everybody loves
Hmm.
working with him. Did I already say great safety record? Great
Yeah.
safety record. Like all the good things.
Yep.
And for some reason, it seems like he is constitutionally incapable of cleaning out the cab of his truck when he's done.
Yeah.
Right. And all the other drivers are frustrated as hell, but when they get into the truck,
Yeah.
because it's filthy, and he keeps saying, "Yeah, I will clean it out," and he keeps not doing it. Are
Yeah.
you gonna fire this guy? Well, conceivably, because
Hmm.
that's damaging to the culture.
Yep.
What they ended up doing, I think, is ingenious, and it's this is a little bit of bad news bears. It's a
Sure.
little bit, it's a little bit um, of my next tip. What they did was they said to him, "You always earn your bonus. You have a choice. You can start cleaning out your cab, and if you don't, lose your job.
Hmm.
That's option 1. Option 2, we take your bonus to pay somebody else to clean out the cab when you're done." And the guy
Yeah.
very happily took the second
Yeah.
option, right? So you can get really creative about how you make space for people to be who they are and succeed in your company.
I, I love that. And I think it requires, I mean, there's so many, for that to have been successful, says so many things about the company to start, right? Number one, they knew what their business was, right?
Mm.
Some companies, right, have a strategy, benefit from great drivers like that, right? The customers love them, the great safety. Some companies are like, no, our strategy is a lot of average drivers. And knowing to value that is non obvious, but really important. The second thing is clearly they had a relationship, right?
Yes.
This wasn't like, you're going 50 miles an hour, you're about to go over the cliff. right? They had a relationship where they could co-solve the problem together and they could be creative and it didn't blow up into a larger thing than it had to. And the last thing is there was some amount of psychological safety here in this organization because the other drivers were making it clear that they were unhappy.
Yes.
So there was
And
no
the solution
complicated
that they came
ferreting
up
out.
with,
Yeah,
wasn't you're a star so you can get away with it.
right.
It was a
Yes,
solution that anybody could have availed themselves of,
that's
right?
right.
If I don't
And,
want to
and
clean
maybe
out
they
my
will.
cab, maybe they will, right? And nobody else in the company wanted that. Everybody wanted their cash.
Right.
Everybody was happy to keep cleaning out their
Yeah,
cab. And they go, all right, he leaves the cab dirty. We know that he has sacrificed income in order
right.
to have that privilege. So this
Yes, he's
is,
paying someone else to do his job. Okay,
yeah,
love it. I love it.
when you are tempted to play favorites, figure out what is the algorithm that you need to write in order to make that okay.
I love
Right?
it.
The algorithm here was if this, then that, right? And that's always the algorithm that can make your desire to play favorites that isn't just about, oh, I like this person, but
Yeah,
is something about their performance. You should, like,
yeah.
Cy Wakeman says, and I totally agree with her. Of course, you have favorites. You should have favorites because some people are delivering and other people are not. That's
Right.
the nature of capitalism and business.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you want to say about?
No, I love this pie expanding story. I'm going to be thinking about this.
Yeah. All right. So, folks, if here's how and why you might want to get a hold of me. If you aren't thrilled with the dynamics on your team, people don't really uh, get into that groove and the chemistry together. If people aren't communicating effectively, if as some of our clients have said, if you're walking on eggshells together, if there are gaps in accountability and people aren't doing what they say they're going to do, if you are looking at growth ahead of you and you've got a great culture and you want to figure out how do we systematize having this great culture so that this culture will continue as we scale? If you want to make that easy instead of a struggle, those all are great reasons to reach out to us. If you want to develop communication, collaboration, and leadership skills amongst your team in any way, those are great reasons to reach out to us at the S Works. And to me, I'm Aaron Schmuckler. I'm the only one there is on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way for you to do it.
Thank you, parents. Look at that.
Right. All right. My fourth and final tip for you is job crafting. People are
Uh-huh.
funny shaped. And so, right, I mean, we just talked a little bit about that with this driver. And I'm going to push back in some ways on what Josh was saying earlier about you don't want to make your company funny shaped. That's not how you put it. And we might agree, right? Because I'm not talking about, you're like if you've got a controller in your
Oh,
company, letting them make some sales calls. That's or letting them avoid spreadsheets. That's
mhm.
crazy talk, right? But if we're talking about not the core of the job, but the margins of the job, people are funny shaped. I remember having a conversation with Joe McSweeney, who at one point was the CEO of Sierra Designs, the folks that make Thermarest. At one point,
Mhm.
the turnaround CEO for SOG Knives, a former client and a good friend of mine. We were talking about this, and he said, and I was talking about how some leaders say, "No, you've got to do the job as designed, and that's it." He said, "Well, people are funny shaped. There is nobody who can do the job as designed as effectively as it might if you move things around on the margins." And so if I'm failing on the margins, and the margins here, like with our driver that we were talking about before, the core of his job is getting the truck and its contents from here to there safely and with good customer service. That's the core of the job. So if people are succeeding at the core of their job and failing on the margins, then it might make sense to collaborate with them and others on your team to figure out how do we shift things around on the margins so people are working in their zone of genius. You're going to get more value out of that person, more value. This is a great way to potentially rescue an underperformer. So
Yeah.
Josh, now it's your time to
I
your
I
opportunity
look,
to take off the gloves and let's duke it out.
I can't disagree, particularly if this is being driven by the person who's struggling, right? Because what
Mhm.
I say to them is, I will do whatever I reasonably can to help you be successful. And if the reasonable thing is take some of my pay to pay someone to clean out the cab, like, oh yeah, 100%. That is more than reasonable to be done and allows
Mm.
you to be successful and allows the company to be successful. So this is great, right? I'm with you 100% as long as this is coming from or in partnership with the person who is struggling.
Mm. Agreed. My good friend Aaron Goldstein, the best employment uh, uh, attorney that I know.
Uh-huh.
Um, he says, speaking of reasonable accommodations, right? Reasonable accommodations is something that we think of usually along ADA lines, right? I've got a
Mhm.
disability that
Yep.
legally obligates you to make reasonable accommodations for me. He's like, look, just make reasonable accommodations for everybody on your team. If it's reasonable and it's going to accommodate them and help them succeed and help them continue to add value to your business, then make that accommodation, right?
Yeah.
And so what's reasonable? It's the things that don't overburden you or overburden the company and that don't take away core job responsibilities, right? I was talking with one of my clients, I think just yesterday, about people who are in her company complaining that they're being discriminated against, that
Hmm.
the reasonable accommodations aren't happening when they're told you have to be on time. Like this
Hmm.
being late for client meetings can't continue, right? That's not a reasonable accommodation because that's going to impact the company's uh, reputation in the marketplace.
Yep.
We're going to figure out how to automate reminders an hour ahead of your appointment so that you get this reminder. We do the work once
Yep.
with your as Josh has been suggesting since we began, with your involvement, with your being a strategic and a- and collaborative partner in coming up with a solution. Our figuring out how to do that, investing a little bit of money and coming up with the
Hmm.
program that's going to send you that reminder, totally reasonable.
Yeah.
And you've still got to be on time.
Yep.
We've got Gail Goldberg chiming in again. Let's see what she's got to say. Compare these sentences. The volume of your voice was insufficient. Your presentation could have been more effective with louder volume. Strategy number 5, session with the employee. She's really into the feedback part. Strategy number 5, session with employee tone assesses what they do
Hmm.
well, skills that are helpful. We're not, I don't know if I'm able to see this whole comment somewhere else. Session with the employee to assess what they do well, skills that are helpful, how to use these to increase functionality in other areas. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think
Your
any
presentation
of
could
these
have
are
been
fine.
effective with louder volume. Maybe, maybe, or maybe we couldn't hear you and it just straight up was
Right.
ineffective.
Yeah. Like, honestly, these all seem fine to me, but depend on the context. Like, have we identified, one of your goals is to present better, right? And we made a list of the ways that, your presentation can be better. One of them is like, make sure the people in the back of the room can hear you. Then being like, yeah, you could have been louder is great feedback. It's in the moment, it's timely, it's actionable, right? They can
Yes.
improve it, right? Right then and there. Like, that's fantastic. If right after the meeting you have to go back through your entire, like, I'm assessing your presentation skills, like, no, we've done this already.
Yeah.
Just tell me if I'm being too quiet. Any of these are great as long as the
Agreed.
context is right. Thank
You
you.
know,
Yeah.
I love that you brought up this, like, doing a mock presentation Josh, I think that I used to be as a theater director. We do a ton of rehearsal in advance of the performance,
Yeah.
and it has never in decades of directing theater, it has never been that what we see again and again and again in rehearsal is the
Hmm.
same as what happens when we get an audience. The
Yeah.
rehearsal is important. The assessment of a mock something may
Hmm.
be valuable and provide valuable information. And it is never going to be an actual effective, totally effective proxy for the real thing.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
Josh, we
Can't
have
disagree there.
we have done it. I think we have delivered 8 ways, and you gave us a bonus one earlier on. Don't hire underperformers. So
Right.
9, there you go. You all
If
got
only were
a
that easy.
freebie.
Yeah.
And Gail, though we may have pushed back, thoroughly appreciate your participation and contributions, because I think that we also agree with a lot of what you were saying,
Yes.
and it's important also to be able to kind of uh, pressure test these ideas, folks. I
That's right.
hope that your
I'd hate
time
for people to
has.
think that there's only 8 ways to do this, and I think that was a good reminder from Gail. There are so many more ways to do
Mm,
this, and this is part of what we're all learning how to do as managers and leaders, and if you ever feel overwhelmed, there are so many resources available to you, including smart people like my friend Aaron.
and my smart people like my friend Josh. I was just going to say, Josh, one of the things that has been of value directly to me as a leader in
Uh-huh.
this conversation has been your consistent emphasis on the need to ensure that they are active
Mhm.
collaborators in their own rescue. There goes the cattail, right? That
Yeah.
that I think, if there is anything among the things that we have talked about today that I need to improve on, it's
Uh-huh.
it's that piece right there, ensuring
Well,
that I am being less directive and more uh, drawing out their inclusion.
if I feel strongly about it, it's only because I have a whole career of failure to remind me.
You and me both. What
Yep.
a great note to end on, Josh. I had a tremendously fun
I had so
time,
much fun. Can't believe it
and
took us 29 years to do this.
me neither. This has been great. It's been fun. I hope, and I truly expect, because it's been valuable for me, that it's been valuable for the folks who are with us remotely.
And if they want to continue the conversation, like put a comment down below on the
Yeah,
post and we'll be
yeah,
there and respond and give us the ninth or the 10th or the 11th way. Tell us where we're
abs-
wrong. Share
right
your
on.
challenges.
All right, folks.